Hello, hello. So it is Sunday, August 11th, and I read only 4 books this past week. However, one of them was 4 books in one, but I only count it as one book because it's in one book, So let's talk about it. First up was a reread. I actually had 2 rereads this week. Did I say month earlier? I meant week. I do weekly. I read a lot of horror and a classic. It's a kind of a weird week. I'm not gonna lie. But I feel like it does make me look really cool. I'm not gonna lie about that. Not like this wouldn't immediately destroy that. Like, hello. Anyway, the first thing I read is The Books of Blood, Volume 1. This is a reread, and I actually very recently reread all of the Books of Blood. Well, not all of them, but like volumes 1 through 3 in like a big, like a bind up. I do think that the first volume does, out of the first 3 volumes, the first volume I think is the most solid. I don't think there's a story in here that I don't like. In general, Clive Barker does tend to do really, I find that short stories tend to hit a lot better than his novels a lot of the time. This one does have the Book of Blood, which is a really good introductory situation. I really like it. Midnight Meat Train, which is kind of a classic. I remember I watched the movie, but I was half asleep. So I don't really remember the movie, except for Bradley Cooper is in it. So The Yattering and Jack, which was like kind of hilarious. Pig Blood Blues, which is Lord of the Flies Ian. Sex, Death, and Starshine, which is kind of one of Barker does sometimes do this thing where he does write this story that's just so full of like yearning, and it's normally about ghosts. And that's Sex, Death, and Starshine in this one. And In the Hills, the Cities, which is I think probably one of the most infamous of these ones, where the people turn into the big people and they tie themselves together. Oh, it's so fun. But no, Clive Barker is a fantastic author. You don't need me to tell you that. Everybody's been saying it since he started writing. And his short stories are super fun. And unfortunately, I just reread this and I just talked about like these stories, but this one does have a lot of my favorites. I think my favorite in this series, not in this series, in this section, in the first book, in the Books of Blood, is probably Pig Blood Blues. Just because if something reminds me of Lord of the Flies, I'm gonna like it a lot more. But no, I give this 5 out of 5 stars, of course. Then I read a book that really disappointed me, and it was on my Kindle. And so I do think that now that I'm not quite so close anymore, it's been a couple of days, I've read a couple more books, probably it doesn't deserve 1 star, but I did give it 1 star because I was so fucking disappointed. And like for reference, I gave Them by Mika Watson 2 stars, and I thought that book was terrible. I think that this book is technically better than that book, but it disappointed me so much, and that is No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. I wanted to like it so bad. So, if you've been around for any amount of time, I've talked about this a couple of times, where I do think that modern extreme horror, and I do make that distinction between modern extreme horror and 80s splatterpunk. Modern extreme horror is not good. It's not good. And the one book that I have read that was an exception to that was Blue Jay by Megan Stockton. I really liked Blue Jay. I thought it was a lot of fun. And so in my head, I was like, well, all the other ones I've written have been by men. So maybe when I read No One Rides for Free, which people love No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. Judith Sonnet is a woman. Maybe I'll like it. And I kind of built it up in my head a little bit. And I was like, yeah, it's going to be a good time. And like, it wasn't that good. And it made me really sad. I will say the relief that I felt when because I read like the synopsis. It was like a woman and her 2 children, and the relief that I felt when these 2 children were in college was pretty great. But I just like technically yes, it was better written than a lot of extreme horror that I've read. A lot of, and I don't mean to malign self-published authors. I also am a self-published author, but I do feel like a lot of extreme horror authors maybe don't do a lot of reading outside of their genre, because it's all very much the same. And Sonnet is a much better writer than the likes of Erin Beauregard and Mika Watson, so good for her. Like I said, like technically it's better than them. It's definitely better than them, but it just there was no like, and I guess the reason might have been that there's no reason it's random acts of violence, but like that reason didn't really even fit right, you know, like it didn't even really work right for that being the reason. Oh god, I've destroyed a book. We're gonna have fun when I hold up the American, I'm not gonna lie. Like it just felt like an extended short story in a bad way, like extended short story derogatory. I don't know, it was really disappointing. And the characters were not good. And I mean, this is something that I notice a lot with extreme horror, is that your villains are just caricatures. And I think that the genre does kind of lend itself to that, but like, come on. Can we have a little nuance? Just a little bit of nuance. I don't know. And I guess it's my fault for going into a genre that is like delights itself in being trash, but just because we're talking about gross shit doesn't mean that our writing has to be bad and that our characterization has to be non-existent, okay? Like, when you look back at your 80s splatterpunk, at your Poppy Z. Brights, at your Richard Lehman, who, let me be perfectly frank, Richard Lehman is not a paragon of literary excellence, okay? Like, he's not. But they had feeling. Like, Poppy Z. Bright is actually a wonderful writer, and I love Poppy Z. Bright. Richard Lehman had so much feeling. There was so much going on in there. And even if his reasons for his plots were like a little bit wacky, like, do we remember One Rainy Night? Like, that's kind of racist and a little weird. But there was a reason for his plots. Like, I was really disappointed. I gave it 1 star. And actually, now that I talk about it, I'm getting mad again. So we're going to move on to some classics. We're going to move on to a classic novel. We're going to move on to The American by Henry James. This novel, as I read it, did completely fall to pieces. Like, as I was reading it, whatever was behind what I had been reading fell out of the book. So this one will be retiring, dying after this. I might take it to the school and use it for crafts. I haven't decided yet. But anyway, The American by Henry James is the story of an American living in Paris, and he decides he wants to take a European wife, and he sets his sights on this widow. She's young, she's beautiful, and she is descended from like nobility, so her family does have very kind of strict ideas about the man who, if she's going to remarry, who the man should be. And I really enjoyed this. As somebody who was an English major, I had to read Daisy Miller about 17,000 times in college, and I read The Turn of the Screw by myself. Neither of those books I felt very strongly about. I kind of actively disliked The Turn of the Screw, I'm not gonna lie. But this one I really, really enjoyed. I thought the characterization was super fun. I really liked Valentin. He was my favorite. Valentin was my favorite. And I guess that should have made me realize he was gonna fucking die, but you know. And I think as a classic, it's very approachable, and it's not really all that difficult to get through. It's very short as well. It's only about 300 pages. I think that if I had a nicer copy that was not actively falling apart, I would probably keep it. I'm not gonna lie. No, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It was a good time. And then I reread a book. It's like a childhood best friend, and that is the Bachman books by Stephen King. This has been my copy of the Bachman books since I was 13 years old, since I first read it. And I do think that I like Glamorama and Lord of the Flies more than I like these books, which is hard for me to say because I did count The Long Walk as my favorite book for 15 years. But the Bachman books, 4 books. First up, we got Rage, which is no longer a print. It's about kind of a school shooting. I really enjoy Rage. I can really appreciate Rage. I like kind of the character study that it is. Then we got The Long Walk, of course, The Long Walk. Whenever anybody asks about an underrated Stephen King book, somebody always mentions The Long Walk. And at what point do you have to say it's not underrated? Everybody agrees it's good. You know, like... It's generally considered like the best of the Bachman books. I love The Long Walk. The Long Walk was my favorite book for 15 fucking years, man. Like, I know this book left and right, back to front, up and down. Like, I just... rereading it was a good time. But no, I do think that it's not my favorite book of all time anymore. It definitely isn't. I did not have as many emotions rereading The Long Walk as I did rereading Glamorama a couple weeks ago, which is so fucking weird to say. But no, I love The Long Walk. Dystopian future, 100 boys walk border from Maine, Canada, down until there's only one left. You fall in love with these teenage boys. You really like them if you're 27, and then they end up all dying one by one. Roadwork. I did not like Roadwork for the longest time, but I kept rereading because I reread the whole thing. I can appreciate Roadwork now. It's still my least favorite of the bunch, but it is about a man who is not doing so hot. His son had recently died of a brain tumor, and now they're building a road straight through his house and through the laundry that he works at, and he is not dealing with that in a very productive way. And then The Running Man, which is another game show kind of one, which is also super fun. I really like The Running Man. The Long Walk is going to be a movie, like for real this time, which is kind of insane. I give it 5 out of 5 stars. I have a lot of feelings about this series, but that is that. So this collection, it's not a series. I have a lot of feelings, but I think I've said them 1,000 times. These are the books I read this past week, plus the Judith Sonnet one that I don't even want to think about. I hope this next week I will read more. I'm about 60 pages into Lost Boy, Lost Girl by Peter Straub. It's all right so far. Peter Straub has really hit with me really once with Special Place, and everything else I've read by him has been just like, all right. So I don't foresee this hitting like Special Place did, but it's all right so far. Yeah, that is everything. I will talk to you later, and goodbye.